Hello there, welcome back to the Chap's Guide. My name is Ash and I am your host on this journey through men's style, self-development and personal grooming. Now today is a review which has been a long time coming because it has remarkably been more than 3 years now since I've purchased my Tudor Black Bay GMT watch. In fact, I bought this watch on, let's have a look, on the 7th of March 2020. And I think now it's been in my possession for a little bit of time. I want to talk to you about my journey with this watch, what I've thought about it over the years that I've been wearing it, and give you my updated view on where this sits within my watch collection. But yes, I can't believe it's been well over 3 years now, because I bought the watch, or rather my wife bought the watch for me to celebrate my 50th birthday, which was in February 2020. So she bought me this watch just a little while afterwards. And I bought it brand new from an authorized dealer in the nearby city of Bath to my home. And back then, in March 2020, the watch cost £3,040 British pounds. Now today, a little over 3 years later, the watch costs £3,590. So it's gone up a fair bit in price. You know, it's gone up £500, which is a significant proportional shift over just 3 years, because the watch is identical, nothing at all has changed. This very same watch is still available today. Why did I buy the watch? Well, I say my wife bought it for me under my sort of direction. When she asked me what do I want for my 50th birthday, this is what I said. Why did I choose it? Well, the watch had come out in 2018 and I was conscious that it was an interesting watch. It was the colour scheme which really drew my attention to it, and as many people did. You know, a couple of watches in fact came out the same time as this one, which revitalised the blue red on the bezel. The Rolex GMT Master 2 in the Pepsi coloration came out, as did this Tudor Black Bay GMT, also with the Pepsi coloration. And as a consequence, Pepsi was all the rage at the time. Now, I was relatively new into watch collecting at that time. I'd already bought a Rolex Datejust, so a 36mm model with a blue dial, and I'd also bought what else did I have? I had a Rolex Submariner, the 40mm version with the black ceramic bezel. And I thought to myself, I'm in a good place with Rolex, let's try something else. Tudor was in its resurgence in, you know, the sort of early 2020s. It was a trendy watch, everywhere you looked it was on billboards, and I thought to myself, I like their vibe, I like what they're putting out, you know, this sort of younger, more vibrant version of Rolex in a way, because of course they share a family relationship. They were both founded by the same person, Hans Wilsdorf, and I thought, yeah, I can get into these Tudors. So I was a little concerned about a few things to do with this watch, predominantly its size, but the aesthetic is what called out to me. The reason I bought it was because of the colours and its overall appearance, which has got a bit of a retro chic thing going on as well. So whilst we're talking about this watch, which you can hardly see in my hands, let me give you a close-up on it, and perhaps we'll talk about the statistics of what makes the watch really, you know, the sort of thing that it is. Why are people drawn to it? So here we go. Let me just get this on my little phone for you. So there it is, the Tudor Black Bay GMT. A very classic looking watch, and I think for me one of the things which appealed to me about its aesthetic was the fact it was a little bit retro. Now when you look at the Rolex version of this watch, it's got larger circular indices, and the ceramic bezel makes it look very different, and I'll show you that watch in a moment because I have one of those with me as well. But the thing that draws the eye is that bezel, as you can see, red at the bottom, blue or darker blue at the top, quite muted colours. The red's quite strong when the light catches it, but it's paint on aluminium, which is different to most of these bezel watches with colour you'll see these days, because the bezels will be these days picked out in a ceramic material, which means they never fade and they won't scratch. But the sort of the retro look gives it a certain vibe in itself. Now when you look at the watch itself, it's got a black dial, white indices. The hands, as you can see that there are 3 of the famous Tudor snowflakes in evidence on the dial. You've got one on the hour hand, the second hand, and that red GMT hand, which is just about at the 6 o'clock marker on the dial at the moment. Let's see if I can get in any closer for you. I find these quite interesting. Some people say they hate the snowflakes. I find them certainly part of the character of this watch, and I wouldn't be without them. You'll notice the date complication, or the date window, at the 3 o'clock on the dial. I find it really rather small and hard to read, but perhaps that's because I'm used to watches with magnified date sections. So the big thing about the Tudor is its size, right? Lots of people talk about the size on the old Tudor, and it is a 41mm watch across the dial, which is not uncommon. Many watches are 41mm, and this is by no means exceptional, but it wears somewhat larger for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's very thick, all right? It's a really beefy watch, and in side profile, it's actually 14.6mm, which makes it really rather chunky. And you can even see that the crystal is sticking out above that as well. So it makes it quite a thick watch. And you'll notice the side of the watch is also quite slab-sided. They've not tried to contour it at all. It's just a big, thick chunk of watch. And the lugs are 22mm, right? So the bracelet is 22mm at its thickest point. It does taper slightly down to the clasp, but 22mm is this piece. A quite chunky unit indeed. Now the bracelet itself, as I talk about it, is an oyster style bracelet. Obviously we can't call it an oyster bracelet, that's a Rolex thing, but an oyster style bracelet. And the clasp, let me just, I'm trying to operate this on a table, it's not easy. There we see the clasp, a straightforward clasp, there we go. Nothing spectacular to talk about, but something which I think is a bit of a weakness on this watch is the clasp, but we will talk about that when we go back to the main screen. But there we have it. Whoops. The Tudor Black Bay GMT in my butterfingers. Worth mentioning as well is that massive crown on the side, unguarded crown, and the statistics you will want to be aware of. It is a certified chronometer, so excellent timekeeping. It is 200 meters of water resistance with a screw down crown. That big crown is a screw down, so it's really effective, as good as most dive watches. And it gives you about 70 hours of power reserve on this piece as well. So you get quite a lot of bang for your buck for £3,590. So let's talk about my journey with the old Tudor. So when I bought it, I took it home and I was in love with it. I loved the colours, I loved everything about it. I loved the fact that it was a really beefy watch and it was quite a dominant wrist presence. You know, there is no doubt that this watch commands your attention on the wrist. It's a chunk, it's heavy, it's steel, it's chunky. One of the problems with it is that clasp I just showed you only has 3 micro adjustments, which all need a tool to adjust, right? So it doesn't have any on-the-fly adjustment. Unlike lots of the new Tudor models, which now have this amazing T-fit clasp, which really makes adjusting your watch perfect. So on warm summer days, like today, where your watch will inflate as your blood pressure increases, you know, your wrist gets a bit thicker, I found it, when I bought this watch, really challenging to get a comfortable fit. I just couldn't get it right. It was either too slack or too tight. And I really struggled with it. I tried to wear it for a month, and after a month I took it off for a while and left it off. Went back to my other watches. Then I felt a bit guilty and I swapped it onto a leather band. I bought a cheap leather band, not a Tudor piece at all, but I bought one off eBay to see if I would get on with it. Actually, it revitalized the watch for me. I got a good fit, it looked quite nice, and I wore the watch solidly for 12 months, more or less. other than sort of occasions where I wanted something different. But I wore the watch consistently, and I wore it mountain biking, trekking, working in the woods. I never took it off. And I found it to be an incredibly robust, attractive, interesting, and I would say quite masculine watch as well, because of its size. It really comes across as an alpha watch, you know, a big, boisterous piece on your wrist that demands attention. And I really rather connected with the retro styling. Although it's a modern watch and it doesn't pretend to be anything else, that aluminium bezel with the paint on it, opposed to the modern ceramic versions, and the dial, which is a little bit more old-fashioned in the smaller indices opposed to the larger ones you see on most watches today, I really liked it. The lume on this watch is excellent as well. It has an interesting sort of green throw to it, and it is quite attractive, long-lasting, does its job very well. This is a really solid performing watch. There is no doubt about it at all. Now, I do have to say that a lot of Tudor Black Bay GMTs, they suffered a problem with the date wheel, you know, because the date wheel would get stuck between two different dates, which necessitated the watch being sent into the service centre. I didn't have that problem, never had any issues with this watch. So it's not been an issue for me, so I won't speak about it anymore because it hasn't affected me. But what did affect me was the fact that my watch collection began to grow. And in fact, a couple of years after getting this one, I ended up buying the Rolex GMT Master 2. I got it from an AD at the sort of retail price, so I wasn't unhappy with that at all. But then I found myself with two Pepsi style watches. And whilst the Tudor is a great watch, it's a lovely watch, I thoroughly enjoyed it, when it was compared to my Rolex version of this watch, if you want to compare them in such a light, I found it to feel a little less refined, a little bit more of a blunt instrument. And particularly as I was lucky enough to get the Rolex on the Jubilee bracelet, I found that the comparison between the two left the Tudor flagging a little because of its simplicity. It seemed to be a more of, well, the best way I can describe it really is as a blunt instrument. And that thickness, which is something which I initially enjoyed because of its chunky robustness, then as I got a little more refined in my tastes, I started to find it a disadvantage, that it was big. I mean, it does slip under the cuff of a standard dress shirt quite easily, but I found it a little bit awkward sometimes. It's rather heavy, and because the watch head is very rather thick at nearly 15 millimeters, sometimes it feels top heavy on the wrist. Now my wrist is 6.5 inches in diameter, my left wrist, the wrist on which I wear my watches. And a watch of this size, I think I am really on the limit of wearing a watch of this size. I mean, sometimes it feels too big, if I'm being honest, and it does feel a bit clumpy and a bit too big for my wrist. And I'll wear it for a few days, I'll take it off, I'll put, say, a Rolex Submariner on, which in itself is not a small watch, and it feels much smaller. You know, that slightly smaller, 1 millimeter smaller Rolex Submariner feels like a kid's watch on my wrist after I've been wearing the old Tudor. So if you like really big chunky watches, the Tudor is very much the way to go. But for me, I was changing in the way that I like watches. My stylings were veering a little bit more towards a bit more refined, and I found that I took the Tudor off and I probably didn't wear it for 12 months. I left it on the leather strap, and I felt guilty. So I put it back on its stainless steel strap. I did wear it a little bit last year, but I started then to let my son wear it. I've got a 13-year-old son who's a big lad. He's at least the same size as me, if not, he's going to be a lot bigger than me in time. And I let him wear the watch, you know, when we were going to special occasions, family occasions like that, because he loves wristwatches. He wears a Seiko and a Timex, but I thought, give him the opportunity, let him wear the Tudor as a special occasion, and actually he's really grown into the watch. Now, one thing I failed to mention is the complication on this watch, the fact that it has a GMT complication, which allows you to track another time zone using the additional GMT hand, which goes round that dial once every 24 hours, and in conjunction with the bezel, allows you to track another time zone. Now, like everybody says, oh, it sounds like a really practical complication. You can keep track of 2 time zones, you can, contact your relatives in New Zealand and make sure you're not going to ring them in the middle of the night. You can check your watch. The simple reality is I own 3 GMT watches, and I don't think I've set that GMT complication on any of those pieces in the last 2 years. It simply becomes superfluous when you live with the watch for a while, because let's be honest, you do the arithmetic in your mind. I've got a friend who lives in America. I know he's 5 hours behind me on the time. I just simply do the arithmetic. I don't have to look at the GMT hand on my watch. But I thought I'd throw that in. So little relevance to the GMT the complication has, that I actually never ever refer to it on any of my GMT watches. Okay, let's talk about the pros and the cons on this watch then, to round up. First of all, the pros. The obvious pro for this watch is that it is a big, chunky, dominant watch. So if you're an alpha male and you want an alpha male watch, which is going to be probably the biggest on anybody's wrist in the room, unless you're in the room with somebody who's got something from Breitling, this is a good watch. If you're a big statured person, you've got a 7-inch or larger wrist, and you want a watch which is going to fill that real estate at the end of your arm. The other thing I would say about this watch is that it's colourful, it's rugged, it's interesting, and it's got a retro style to it. It's a little bit different to all of those clones of watches that are coming out today, which seems to have ceramic everywhere. They're all following the route that Rolex took maybe 10, 12 years ago now, but ceramic on watches is old hat. I think when you see painted aluminium bezels on these older watches, there's a little bit more style there, which I do find rather attractive. What else can I tell you? It's easy to use, that's for sure. Now, the very large crown on this watch is very easy to operate. You just unscrew it, and it's actually really, my particular watch has got a buttery clockwork movement. When I wind it up, it's smoother, without doubt, than my Rolex GMT Master 2. This movement to wind feels a little bit more hard going than the Tudor, which is much smoother, silky even. What else can I tell you? It's very practical, all right? It is a solid, tough watch. As I say, 200 meters of water resistance, not to be sniffed at. You know, that's the equivalent of most dive watches out there. And with that screw down crown, I have no doubt that you could go on an undersea adventure with this, and it will be as tough and as rugged as a Rolex Submariner any day of the week. And with 70 hours power reserve, which is kind of the industry standard now, but back in 2018 when this came out, it was definitely charging ahead. Now let's talk about the cons, the negatives. The negative, the biggest one for me, over the time that I've owned it, and the thing which has led to me not wearing this watch very much now, is its size. It is big, and it feels big, it feels chunky, and it feels every one of those 14.7 millimeters thick. And that's kind of what's put me off from wearing it. I'm a little bit more refined. I like watches to be a little more stealthy perhaps, and this one is definitely not stealthy. And the other thing I would say, maybe my biggest bugbear with this watch, is the lack of an on-the-fly adjustment on the bracelet. If it had a T-fit clasp, it would be totally different with its comfort levels. Now, Tudor have introduced a T-fit clasp on pretty much every watch they've brought into their collection in the last couple of years. It is really sad that they have not placed it onto even the modern versions of the Black Bay GMT, because that would really improve this watch's wearability and its comfort levels, in my opinion. So, in conclusion, it's a really beefy, tough, rugged watch which has got a bit of a retro styling to it, and its wrist presence is awesome, large, dominant, gets the job done. It's a GMT that performs perfectly as a GMT if you want to use that complication. If you don't, it's a great thing to have on your wrist in daily situations. I'm absolutely sure that this is going to be a mainstay of the Tudor collection going forwards. You know, we see Tudor doing new things with this watch all the time. Since I bought this one, they've introduced a steel and gold version, which has the sort of root beer configuration on the bezel. Last year we saw, or this year rather, we saw Tudor bringing out an opaline, or a sort of white silvery dial, which takes this Black Bay GMT into another dynamic of appearance. I think there is so much more they can do. I mean, we've seen that Rolex are absolutely kicking the arse out of their GMT range by introducing different colours, different materials, different bracelet styles, something different. They're really milking it because people seem to love the GMT complication. It's simple, it's elegant, it's something anybody can use in practical application, although in reality, we probably won't. Once we get the watch, we probably won't use the GMT at all, but it's there if you ever want to. What's this watch going to do in my collection? To be perfectly honest with you, I very rarely wear it these days because I found its chunkiness and its robustness just that little bit too big for me. And now I allow my son to wear it quite often. In time, when he gets a little bit older, a little bit more sensible, he will have this watch. I won't sell it. What's the point? The thing with Tudors is they simply don't retain their money. Even though this watch has gone up in value, you know, in so much as at the point of purchase, it's gone up £500 since I've bought it. If I was to sell this today, I would be taking a significant loss. And I just don't want to do that. I would rather pass it on to somebody in the family, like my boy, who I know will love it, and this will give him a leg up into his watch experiences, his watch journey in the future. For me, the Tudor tends to stay in the safe, and when I need a GMT watch, I'm sorry to say, its slightly more refined, smaller cousin, which wears that little bit better, is the one that's going on my wrist at the end of this review. And it's kind of sad, because much as I like the watch, its cons, in so much as its size and its comfort level, because of the poor adjustment available on the clasp, means I simply don't wear it anymore. So there we go. That was my 3-year review of my Tudor Black Bay GMT. I doubt I'll be able to give you a 5-year review because I think it'll be on somebody else's wrist then, and it won't be mine. But we've come this far together. You can't say I didn't give it a try. So there we go. If you have enjoyed this video today, give the video a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, click subscribe. If you would like to pass your comment on something that I've said, drop it into the comment section. If you'd like to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee or become a patron, and I produce additional video content for my patrons almost every week. So until the next time, take care, wear your watches with pride and passion, and I will see you again very soon.